Fox News alert on a major earthquake happening minutes ago in Alaska and a tsunami warning now in effect. Hello, everyone. I'm Dana Perino, and this is the Daily Briefing. We got this news about an hour and a half ago. It was a 7.0 magnitude quake rocking the city of Anchorage, just about 5 to 10 miles north of Anchorage. It opened huge cracks in the roads and caused people to run for shelter. Dan Springer is live in Seattle. He has been with us trying to explain all that he knows so far. Tell us what you have, Dan.
Yeah, Dana, we just got our first news out of the Anchorage Police Department. They've been scrambling, obviously, to get all the calls that they're taking in and then responding. And we got our first report from them, and it says we are handling multiple situations. We're working with our public safety partners to keep everyone safe. Here's the thing. They say there is major infrastructure damage across Anchorage. Many homes and buildings are damaged. Many roads and bridges are closed. Stay off the roads if you don't need to drive. Seek shelter. Check your surroundings. So they're obviously dealing with a lot of problems there right now. The schools have asked for the parents to pick up their children. We just got word from the Anchorage International Airport that the runways are open, so they are landing planes there, but they are not allowing people to drive up to and from the airport. So the ramps, the incoming and outgoing ramps to the airport have been closed. And I was texted a picture from a colleague, a person who works for Senator Murkowski, who sent it from me, who was actually seeing a tweet about this. Major road damage on Minnesota Drive, which is right there next to the International Airport. International Boulevard, which runs to the airport, is damaged as well. So you have severe damage to a lot of the roads. I did talk to some people in hotels there. One in a Marriott said that it shook pretty well, in fact, for about a minute, but that there was not significant damage to that hotel. But there are reports of people diving under desks and trying to just, get away from falling debris. But this is a 7.0 earthquake, 19 miles now, centered just about 7 miles north of Anchorage, just across the Cook Inlet in a place called Point McKenzie, which is not very populated, but the city of Anchorage, as you know, is almost the entire population of the state of Alaska, with about 280,000 people. So virtually everybody in that area is going to feel it. We had an initial a tsunami warning that did not get extended all the way down to the Seattle area and beyond. The tsunami warning is located for the Cook Inlet, and it actually goes down to other parts of Alaska, but is not extended all the way down the coast. That's because of the depth of this earthquake.
Could I pause you there, Dan, and stand by? We want to go live to our affiliate, KTVA, in Anchorage. The building suffered a lot of damage. Let's listen in.
Debris.
And this light fixture's just kind of hanging on by a thread, it looks like.
I definitely
don't even like this whole idea of, at least Helen over there. Yeah, I mean.
I'd like to show where I was when this happened, just because this is a pretty impressive example of what you're looking at, about why it's important to get under shelter.
Oh my!
So this is the room I was in when this happened. I don't know how well you guys can see, but this is our tape room. All these tapes.
Back to early Iditarod. I mean, like the first Iditarod is in here. We got some really cool classic footage.
Yeah,
and KTVA archives here.
I was sitting over there at that computer, and luckily got out of the building before a lot of this happened, but this is going to be a mess to clean up, obviously. But imagine if you were trying to hide or take shelter against the wall with the tapes. This is why you don't do that, because this can fall on you, it can hurt you. A lot of this other stuff could have fallen and got you, or any of us. Don't stay under a doorway. Yeah. Get under something sturdy.
What's back here?
Looks like we got our.
This used to be the graphics department. Oh man, entire tables flipped over back here and looked. Or maybe this is just mess to begin with.
It is not.
No,
this is worse.
And then
let's go downstairs.
A lot of people were asking if anyone was okay, if everybody here was okay, and I believe everybody got out of the building okay. It was 8:30, so we didn't get our big rush of people coming into work quite yet. In fact, some folks that were usually here about this time weren't in yet, which was kind of a surprise to me. Be careful there, Doug. And we should show off Augie Hebert, the pioneer of Alaska television. The studio is named after him. And man,
we got some more damage. This is kind of what happens in earthquake damage. What happens is the whole building shakes, and the foundation, especially around wall seams, sort of just rips. So right here you can see these studs where we had the studs come in. They got shook loose.
Look at that.
All right, so we lost that picture there, but we have Dan Springer still available with us. And also, he's because Dan's going to stand by. Ben English is in Alaska. He felt the earthquake. He joins me now by phone. Dan, if you'll stand by, we're going to bring in Ben English, who was there and witnessed it firsthand. Ben, are you there?
Yes, ma'am.
Tell me a little bit about what you experienced.
Well, I was on the 10th floor of my office building, and so the shaking was pretty extreme. It's exacerbated a little bit when you're high up in a building. There's pretty significant damage in the building, and I was able to make it home. I live close to the building, but there's pretty much major roadblocks and everybody trying to get out of Anchorage back home, and quite a bit of infrastructure damage.
How long did it last?
Well, I've been through a lot. I've been here about 20 years, and, you know, this one definitely was a lot longer, and something that intense, you know, time kind of stands still a little bit, so it's hard to tell exactly. If I had to guess, I'd say between 1 and 2 minutes.
And I'm assuming because you live there, you've been through this before, and you'd had drills in your building, so you knew what to do?
Yeah, it's kind of a panic situation. We have more fire drills rather than earthquake drills. I'm lucky that the building that I work in is designed pretty well for earthquakes, so damage was minimal. I think the major damage around town is probably going to be mostly infrastructure, the bridges and roads and things like that.
Yeah, just for those who hadn't had the opportunity to go to the beautiful spot of Anchorage, Alaska, and its surroundings, tell us a little bit about the importance of the roads there. It's not like there are a lot of other options. It's not that highly populated. Tell me more about the damage.
No, well, yeah, there's basically one highway heading north and one highway heading south to get out of the city, and a lot of commuters live in those places, and if those roads are shut down, they have no other options to get home unless you took a helicopter or a boat. So I would imagine there's going to be people, if the roads are closed down, somewhat stranded in Anchorage, not able to get to their homes.
How did you said you got home pretty easily. How was that? Did you walk?
I'm about 5 minutes from work, so I'm pretty lucky. I live over close to the airport, and my office is in Midtown. So I'm home now just assessing damage at the house, and we have, a lot of pictures fell and glasses came out of the cupboards and smashed on the floor, and there's cracks in the walls and things like that, but nothing too extreme. I think I live in a pretty good soil area, but I think that folks who are in more of the bedrock areas probably shook harder and may have more damage than I do. I think I probably fared pretty lucky. One gentleman in my office moved here in 1968, right after the big 64 earthquake, and he said it's by far the strongest one he's felt in the last 50 years.
When was the last one you remember?
We have them, every year. We have them all the time, little ones. The biggest one I remember since I've been here about 20 years was 2002. I believe it was a 7.6 up near Denali, so it was a couple hundred miles away. It did damage, but this was much more severe in Anchorage, even though it was less of a magnitude because of the proximity. It was so close to Anchorage, and I think the depth was fairly shallow.
For the epicenter, tell me about that area. Is it, I'm assuming, not highly populated, but do people live up there?
Some do. I think it was at Point McKenzie, which is basically right across Cook Inlet from the city of Anchorage. And there's some infrastructure out there, railroads, some industrial stuff, but I think, the outskirts of Wasilla and Palmer probably felt it pretty strong as well. But right where the epicenter is, not too much built up, but again, it's not far from Anchorage, so that's probably the key point. And
what do you know about being prepared for aftershocks?
Well, I know that they have been happening with regularity. Immediately, I think we had a 5.3 or something just 5 minutes after the initial one. So we are to expect aftershocks. I think that's common. I did feel 3 or 4 of them immediately afterwards, and they're saying that we can expect them for the next day or so to be tapering off slowly.
All right, Ben English, we appreciate your coming on with us to tell us about your account. And I will now go to, do we have Dan Springer still? Dan?
Yeah, Dana, I was just listening to your guest there, and one of the things that struck me is that, one thing that Alaska has going for it is that it became a state so recently. 1959 is when Alaska became a state. A lot of the high-rises there were built for government offices and also by the oil companies. After the Alaska oil pipeline was built, in the 60s, and so they're relatively new, they're relatively strong. And I talked to somebody at the Marriott, which is right downtown, not very far from the epicenter, and it shook. It was a big jolt, and it went on for about a minute, but she said she only had a nutcracker fall off the shelf. So obviously a lot of people had more than that, but the point here is that these are post-earthquake, 1964 quake, buildings that were built, and so I think the high rises, we're not going to see major damage to them. You're going to have damage to homes. In fact, we got a report from the Anchorage Police Department, which is getting phone calls from virtually everybody in the city right now, that there has been major structural damage, lots of homes, lots of roads. We have a shot that I saw from a colleague that I work with, not a colleague, but a person who works for Senator Murkowski, who sent a picture that had been tweeted out of Minnesota Drive, which is a main north-south road that goes through downtown and then out of town.
Yeah, this is the big. Dan, we're able to show the picture here, and you can see that that road is, that's going to take a lot of cleaning up to do.
That's a major thoroughfare that connects Anchorage to its midtown areas and then areas further south. It goes all the way, past Anchorage and out. So, and that's also what we heard from the folks at Ted Stevens International, that is right by the airport. So International Boulevard and Minnesota Drive kind of intersect there right next to Ted Stevens International Airport. And again, the reporting is that the runways are open, but the roadways getting to the airport and leaving the airport are closed. So they are landing flights, but people can't leave the airport once they get there. Dana?
All right, Dan Springer, if you'll stand by. Mike Angove is with NOAA. He's the tsunami programming manager. And Mike, if you could just tell us how you make the decision about a tsunami warning. This triggered it immediately after the 7.0 earthquake hit just a few miles north of Anchorage, Alaska.
Yeah, this was an interesting one. It was a very large earthquake, but it's not in an area that we typically have to really worry about for tsunami. We typically are looking out into the subduction zone that would be maybe 100 kilometers or two offshore. But this occurred inland in the Cook Inlet. But because of the size, 7.0, that's a big earthquake. That creates a lot of shaking within the inland waterways, and the big concern for us is, does that shaking result in any landslides that might be falling into those waterways that can then create their own little tsunamis? And there has been a history of that happening in Alaska. So that was our big concern with this. I am happy to report that we have just canceled that warning. Our center in Palmer has been looking very closely at all of the water level gauges throughout the Cook Inlet and the Kenai Peninsula, and has determined that none of that activity, at least large, happened. And so we just canceled the warning. But that's why we put it up and why we needed that time to do all that water level evaluation.
And how do you do that? How technically does that work?
So the center in Palmer they're looking at just doing a quick earthquake analysis, and we have seismic sensors all over the state of Alaska, so they were able to get that pretty quick. And if the magnitude is large enough, then we have a pre-planned response that says, okay, we have this risk of local tsunami, and so that all sort of happens in a pre-planned way, and then we get into the real live time of looking at all of the coastal water level gauges. Some of them are tide gauges, fishing stations, or whatever the case is, anything that tells us is water level moving. And so that's really what the focus of that warning center becomes once the initial alert goes up, is to closely monitor the water level gauges.
All right, so just to reiterate, you have canceled the tsunami warning, so that everybody that was asked to move to higher ground can now return to their desks or their homes, wherever they were going.
That is correct.
All right, Mike Angove, we appreciate you coming on. We'll stay in touch with you as anything else develops. We appreciate that. Dan Springer, if you're still there, if you could tell us a little bit about the epicenter here. You said that this Mount McKenzie. You said it's not highly populated, but if it did this much damage just 20 miles away, or it was 15 to 20 miles away from Anchorage, what might it have done up there?
Point McKenzie is this rural area that is literally could be just a little suburb of Anchorage. It's just across the Cook Inlet, and years ago we did a story about efforts by Ted Stevens, Senator Ted Stevens at the time, trying to get a bridge from Anchorage across the Cook Inlet into Point McKenzie, because a lot of folks in Anchorage see that that's the next logical space for the city of Anchorage to grow. It has 280,000 people. They want space to grow. It's a wide open area, but they never got that bridge built because it was pushed back in Congress for the pork barrel spending that he was seeking. Anyway, it's a wide open area, and just north of that is Wasilla. And we just got a tweet out from Sarah Palin, who's the most famous resident of Wasilla, and she says, "Our family is intact, house is not." Imagine that's the case for many, many others. So thankful to be safe, praying for our state following the earthquake. So you got Point McKenzie, which is just across the Cook Inlet from Anchorage, and then you go further north and you have Palmer and Wasilla and some of those outer suburbs of Anchorage. But the area of Point McKenzie itself is not populated at all. But this happened so close to Anchorage with all those people that everyone there felt it. And so it's going to be, you're going to hear widespread damage.
Dan, I'm going to hold you there. Stand by. We're going to go live to KTVA in Anchorage. Their building also suffered a lot of damage, and they're showing it to us here.
Set up solid and safe.
Have you been able to contact anyone on base or any other?
Can't get through to
We are trying. Yeah.
Ted Stevens International Airport is open. Flights coming in and out. Apparently, little or no damage over there. However, if you have business out at the airport, you are suggested to call your airline. Make sure that everything is still going on there. Have not heard from anyone over at JBER. We've tried. I've tried cell phone. I've tried landline. Calls continue to drop out. So, we do have phones here in the newsroom. And if you have, I will say this: if you do have an agency, if you are a part of an agency, you want to get information out, our newsroom hotline does work. 274-1111.
Very good. Good point. Yeah, 907-274-1111 if you have any information and or you want to from around town if something's going on. But specifically, like you said, emergency departments, we heard ML&P going around. There's different power outages reported in the Anchorage area right now.
Just got something from State Transportation Department. Earthquake damage on Kenai Spur Highway. Milepost 19 passable with care. Use caution when through the area. Damage is at 19.7, 500 feet by 3 to 4 inches wide. Road is passable. Just drive slow and be cautious on all the roads. So that's what we've got right now. And excuse me 1 second.
Yeah, we are clearly getting calls in now live from different people in different agencies. We are going to try our best to keep you guys updated with as much current information as we can. We don't have any information yet about Kenai, Seward Highway, anything like that. We are going to try to get you information about everything as fast as we can here at KTVA. Stay tuned to our Facebook live feed at KTVA's Facebook page and Daybreak page. Look, like as you can tell, the phones are going nuts.
Hey guys, phones are going off right now. That guy, he had just called in, said some bridges. Basically, I wasn't able to pick up too much from him. He said that a friend had relayed some information. Let's find out. KTVA 11 News.
Okay, we're going to transition from KTVA and Anchorage to the USGS. It's a geological survey. They're speaking right now on the earthquake. Let's listen in.
Science matters. So one of the things that we do is help you understand what the consequences are of those short-term decisions. And it's easier to act on the long-term risk when you have more earthquakes, which is why Alaska and California have the strongest loss.
Dr. Jones, along those same lines, you've seen the video of the infrastructure that's been compromised, on-ramps, etc. How does that compare with us here in California in terms of our infrastructure being prepared for such an event?
I do not know enough about Alaska's policies to comment too much about why they have had what they have. I can comment for California. We do a great job of preparing for the last earthquake we had.
Right.
And the last two earthquakes we had both did a lot of damage to our freeways. Since then, beginning with the Loma Prieta earthquake and then with Northridge, Caltrans has spent over $10 billion retrofitting our freeway bridges and on-ramps and off-ramps. So I actually think that that's not likely to be a really big problem in our next earthquake. And I don't know of any similar program in Alaska, but I wouldn't know about it.
The reason I ask is because one would presume with a state that has something like, 40,000 earthquakes a year, that they would be eminently prepared for this sort of thing, and yet there's still massive damage. Is that significant to you and from what you've seen?
How do I put this? It does not surprise me to see this level of damage because nobody's been willing to.
All right, that's a U.S. Geological Survey giving an update there. Another one from Argentina, where the president is. Sarah Sanders, the press secretary, tweeting, "The president has been briefed on the earthquake near Anchorage, Alaska, and is monitoring damage reports. We are praying for our state following the earthquake." And of course, we mentioned that the president has been briefed, and Sarah Sanders tweeting about that as well. Chief Meteorologist Rick Reichmuth, he joins me now. Rick, this map I think it's super interesting. So can you explain it to the viewers here? Because we've been talking about this in the commercial break.
Yeah, so the USGS kind of auto plots where there's any kind of seismic activity anywhere around the globe. So you can see in the past 12 hours, that's represented in yellow. You can see a lot of spots here where we've had some sort of activity. The biggest one, obviously, right there in that center, which is very close to the Anchorage area, and my map is not going to move forward for us.
Okay.
It did just 2 seconds ago, and now it's stuck. So I will tell you, initially they issued that tsunami alert for the Cook Inlet, which goes just down towards the Homer area. A lot of times when we have earthquakes, we've seen them over the last number of years with all of those significant tsunamis. Sometimes a tsunami wave can move all the way across the Pacific Ocean, even down in towards the southern hemisphere. We're not worried about that at all. The initial tsunami warning was issued just for that Cook Inlet, and it's gone. So what we're going to see now is the damage from the earthquake itself. And keep in mind, they have about 6 hours of daylight this time of year in Anchorage, and it's about 28 degrees. So it will very quickly get dark, and then you're going to have to go through the overnight hours. Obviously, many people without power, which is going to be a problem. And that ability to get out and do any kind of search and recovery will certainly be hampered just by the lack of daylight at this point.
That's a really good reminder, Rick, about that. And I wanted to ask you about the question that the U.S. Geological Survey staffer got just before we went to break. And that was a question from a reporter asking, so why can't you have predicted this? Isn't the answer you cannot predict earthquakes?
Yeah, you can't predict earthquakes. You can, after a big one, say that there will be aftershocks, and we've seen a number of aftershocks right here. We will see that again. But those big ones like that, I mean, this is stuff that is happening in the earth way below where we sit that is constantly in motion. And a lot of times it's banging up against each other and just waiting for that moment that it slips. That's what you see in a case like this. You can't predict that. What you can eventually predict is tsunamis. You know that it takes about a 7.0 or higher to cause a tsunami. This one, the center of it was just onshore, but just barely onshore. I'm certain that's why they issued that tsunami warning initially. We do have sensors all across the Pacific Ocean basin to get a sense if there is actually tsunami waves that are moving across the ocean. That helps give warnings farther downstream or farther across the ocean. We're not worried about that, which is the good news here at this point for any kind of tsunamis.
All right. Thank you so much, Rick. We'll be back to you. I want to get to Dr. Ellen Prager. She's a marine scientist and author of Fierce Earth about earthquakes. And Dr. Prager, I had just read that we're not that far away from the anniversary of the 1964 earthquake in Anchorage that really leveled that downtown. Dr. Prager?
Yes.
Yes, hi. I wondered if we could get your take on what you think happened out there today in Anchorage, about, I guess, 19 miles north of the city, and that this is not too far away from the anniversary of the one that hit in 1964 and really leveled the downtown of Anchorage.
Well, in fact, what many people don't know is that Alaska is the most seismically active state in the country. A lot of people think it's California, but it's really Alaska. They are sitting in an area of the world and of the U.S. that is very prone to earthquakes because it's what we call a subduction zone offshore. And so they see these sort of quakes. And a 7.0 is a major quake, and as we've already been learning, has caused major damage.
Right. In fact, Sarah Palin tweeting that her family is intact, but her house is not. and she imagined that that was the case for many, many others. We've seen the reports of some damage of the roads, and of course, there's not all that many roads. There's one in and one highway north and one highway south, of course. Tell me about any concerns about aftershocks here.
Well, we know there will be aftershocks, and when you have a quake of this size, you're going to have significant number of aftershocks. They can be 5.0 magnitude, 4.0, and they're going to last for a significant amount of time. So the larger the earthquake is, the more aftershocks you have, the longer they last, and the more frequent they essentially are. So unfortunately for people who are going to be recovering from the main shock, they're going to have to deal with those aftershocks. And as you heard, it's going to get colder and darker soon, so it's going to be tough. It's such a tough situation for them there.
All right, Dr. Ellen Prager, thank you so much. We continue our coverage of the magnitude 7 earthquake in Anchorage, Alaska. On the phone right now, David Harper, who was at home when it happened. David, tell us about your experience.
Well, I was in the bathroom on the toilet, and it just felt like I didn't hear it coming. My son did, that was in the other room, and he said it sounded like a kind of a low rumble of like a truck starting up, and I literally felt like somebody just started shaking me when I was in the bathroom, and so I ran out and grabbed my son and headed to the doorway, and there's some china, some dishes, whatever else that fell on the floor. Picture frames are kind of array. Yeah, and we're still, even just a couple minutes ago, we're still having some aftershocks.
Yeah, how strong are those as by comparison? Of course, not
they're
as strong.
Not too bad. It's just kind of like a low rumble, might be a small shake, and then it just stops. But that's, I'd say, typical.
And you've been through these before, I assume?
Huh?
You've been through these before?
Yes, and I was actually born here in '84, and I'd say this is probably the strongest as far as like shaking back and forth that I've experienced. I mean, there's other ones that I've experienced that have been longer in time, but this was definitely a good one.
Rick Reichmuth, our meteorologist, pointed out that at this time of year, there is only about 6 hours of daylight in Alaska. From what you can see from outside your window, well, we know that there are some roads that are in disrepair, impassable. Apparently, the highway there is passable with care. Is there any other damage you can see from where you are?
Not from where I'm at. No, I even did a check around the house. I don't see any problems with like the water heating system or anything like that. I actually haven't even checked to see like about the bridge on Minnesota and the overpass as far as the collapse. But I do know I talked to my brother, and he said that there were some cracks on the road, and so he just said he was dropping his kids off at school, and then he felt it start shaking, and
he probably went back and got his kids.
Stopped going into the school.
Right.
From
All
where they were.
Well, David Harper, we're glad that you're safe, and thank you for joining us on the phone. All right, we're going to continue now talking about this massive 7.0 earthquake that struck Alaska. Let's bring back in Dan Springer. You're in Seattle. So, of course, people might not realize how much activity happens earthquake-wise in that northwestern part of the United States.
Oh, yeah. Well, we're just off the Ring of Fire. So in the Pacific Ocean, you've got that subduction zone, that tectonic plate that goes from North America out into the Pacific Ocean, and then that ocean plate. And right there is the major fault that they're worried about causing a catastrophic earthquake someday here in Seattle. But I have some news from TAPS. That's the Transatlantic Pipeline, Transatlantic Pipeline, and that runs all the way from the North Slope, where the predominant amount of oil production takes place, down to Valdez in the southern part of the state. And we just got a word from them that at 8:34 they shut down that pipeline as a precaution. They have not had any reports of any damage or injuries, but they have shut down the pipeline to make sure that they don't have any leaks anywhere. That's standard. We have 3 power companies that are reporting outages, but it's not all of their customers. So Matanuska, that's up in the Wasilla area. They've got 17,000 people without power there. Some people have already been brought back online in Wasilla. The Municipal Light and Power has about 30,000 customers in Anchorage. Not all of them are without power. And in Chugach, the electric company there, a vast majority of their customers have power, but about 16,000 are without. People are posting that they are happy that their power has been restored. So the crews are all out there. They've got every person out there working on restoring power. But again, they've got to race against time because there's so little daylight in Alaska these days that they've got to work
Dan,
hard.
we're looking here at this live shot just outside of Anchorage, Alaska. You can see the major damage there. Sinkholes being reported, and also hopefully, this person whose car is there, hopefully they were able to abandon that car and get to safety. I want to go to Dana Rosso. It's a public affairs officer at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson, just outside of Anchorage. Dana, tell me about what has happened up there to the base. Dana Rosso, do we have you on the phone? Public affairs from Joint Base Elmendorf. No, I guess we don't have him. Okay, so, or her. I don't even know if it's a him or a her. They didn't even tell me. Dana, of course, as you know, is a name that can go either way. We want to bring you that report, though, because there apparently has been a lot of damage. If Dan Springer is still there, I'm sure you've been to the joint base up there. Okay, Dana Rosso, do we have you on the phone now? Dana?
This is Dana Rosso. Yes, I'm
all
on the
right,
line.
Dana Rosso. Hi, Dana Perino here, and we understand that the base has taken in a lot of damage after this earthquake. Maybe we do not have Dana. Dana? All right. It's possible that we're having a tough time getting service up there. In fact, Dan Springer, just let me tell you, I sent a note to my former speech coach, Shaunalee Ann Whitney, and she is a professor up there in Anchorage, and she said that they're rattled but safe. And you're looking at that live picture outside of Anchorage with the damage there to the road. She said that the stoplights are all out, that they are hearing reports of sinkholes that have formed. She knows that of a bridge that collapsed. There's other damage in her home. She said, sort of like what Sarah Palin said, that there a lot of things fell off the shelves, pictures off the wall. The ceiling fan in the bathroom is shattered all over the floor. She said it is the largest she has ever been in, but that they are safe.
And they're a hardy bunch, and they're used to earthquakes. So you're asking if that person got out of that vehicle on Minnesota Drive and got to safety. I'm quite sure they did. I know exactly where that is. That is Minnesota Drive is a main thoroughfare that goes north and south up to Alaska and then down south as you go towards, the Aleutian Islands and what have you.
Okay.
That's a major road that goes through Alaska, and then you take that off ramp, which is where that vehicle was, and that's right to the airport. However, we just got tweets from the Anchorage International Airport in all caps. The Anchorage Airport is open. Check with your airline to make sure. So we're not sure if people can get out of the airport or to the airport, but we know that airlines are landing planes and they're taking off from Anchorage International Airport.
All right. We do have Dana Rosso now, Public Affairs Officer at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson. That's just outside of Anchorage. Dana, we'll try this again because we want to get your eyewitness account of what happened up there at the base. Dana? Apparently the coverage is very spotty. Dana, okay, great. Tell us what you saw.
Good morning. This is Dana Rosso, the Public Affairs Officer for Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson. So obviously this morning, earthquake struck, and we were here in the office and started to feel the initial jolts and movement and took cover. At this time, Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson has recalled its senior staff into our Emergency Operations Center. We have our first responders and our emergency response personnel out on the installation right now. We are assessing any damage to the installation, and we will report that information back up the chain so we can evaluate and figure out how JBER can respond to the situation within the Anchorage area and here on base as well to make sure that we're ready to continue on with the recovery efforts.
Tell us a little bit about the power situation as well on the roads. Infrastructure damage, I'm assuming? Dana?
As of right now, I have not seen any of the damage on the roads. Everything that I've seen around the facilities that I'm in are still intact, and there is traffic moving throughout. Our emergency responders have been able to get to different areas of the installation. And as of right now, on base, I'm not reporting any road damages.
Okay, that's very good to hear. Anything then that the troops up there do to help the community when something like this happens?
We will stand by for anything that comes about. Obviously, we have our runways here on the installation, so if we need to get aircraft in and out of the area, we're standing by to assist with that. And then we've got a team of first responders, so if there's needs within the...
All right, welcome back. We are continuing our coverage of the earthquake that happened about 2 hours ago in Anchorage, Alaska. It was about 19 miles north of the city of Anchorage, Alaska, but the damage felt certainly all around there, and we're getting reports of that. Let's go to Dan Springer. You were covering this from the very beginning. Let's just start from the beginning, re-rack this, and tell us what happened.
Yeah, at 8:30 this morning, Anchorage was hit with a massive earthquake, a major earthquake of 7.0. The magnitude came in at 6.7, then dropped to 6.6, and then now they've settled on 7.0. It happened just north of the city of Anchorage in a place called Point McKenzie. And that is an area that is pretty lightly populated. It's just across the Cook Inlet from Anchorage, but it's so close. It's just a few miles north of Anchorage, so everybody in Anchorage felt this earthquake. It was relatively deep at 19 miles. Initially, there was a tsunami warning that was issued for all of Alaska down the Aleutian Islands. That warning did not get down to places like Seattle and further down the coast. That's because of the depth of this earthquake. It happened just north of the subduction zone, which we've heard so much about. The damage is widespread. You're seeing video of that widespread damage all across the state. Alaska Governor Bill Walker just issued a declaration of disaster. He says he has been in contact with the president on this. There have been multiple water main breaks. The fire department's responding to that. They've also taken students from one school and taken them to safety at a fire station. Parents are being urged to pick up their kids from schools. It's a real mess. You see that video there of Minnesota Drive. That is a main thoroughfare. That's actually an off-ramp of Minnesota Drive that would get people from Minnesota Drive into the airport, Anchorage International. And so that is shut down, obviously, right there. The airport itself is open. Planes are landing and taking off. But we understand there's major damage to International Boulevard, which is the main road that would take people to the airport. So you might be able to fly into Anchorage right now, but you might not be able to get very far. There is widespread damage to buildings. I've talked to people in high-rises, relative high-rises of 13, 14 stories. You don't have, 50-story buildings in Anchorage. They said that they felt it, obviously, but they didn't have major damage. This is a relatively new state. Became a state in 1959. Most of those buildings are very well equipped for major earthquakes, and so I don't expect to see major catastrophic damages to the larger buildings. They're mainly government buildings and those that were built by the oil companies. But we are getting reports of widespread damage to homes and roads and some of the bridges in Anchorage. Dana?
Yeah, indeed. In fact, in 1964, when that earthquake hit Anchorage, Alaska, it really did a lot of damage to the downtown area. So as you point out, thankfully in our country, we have the ability and the resources to build to code so that the damage is not structural. But of course, people don't like to have their homes all shaken up like that. All right. Thank you so much. We have a tweet now from Senator Dan Sullivan. He's one of the senators from Alaska. He writes, indeed. All right. On the phone is Mike West. He's a state seismologist for Alaska and director of the Earthquake Center in Fairbanks. Tell us what you know, Mike.
Well, as I think your listeners know, we had a magnitude 7 earthquake about 2.5 hours ago here in Alaska that was very close to Anchorage. That's what makes this event notable. Large earthquakes are not uncommon in Alaska, but to be 5 miles away from downtown Anchorage is.
Mm-hmm. And what do you know then about the possible damage that Anchorage is looking at in terms of having to clean up? And how far outside of Anchorage? For example, we had the Sarah Palin tweet from Wasilla. We know that's just outside of Anchorage, but this damage could be quite widespread?
This earthquake was about 30 miles beneath the surface of the Earth, so it was actually felt over a pretty wide area, not just in Anchorage proper, but certainly Wasilla and throughout the surrounding towns there. It felt very, very strongly, and damage is coming in from a number of different directions.
And tell me a little bit more about just the frequency of activity. And I'm just curious about how things have changed since 1964 when that last big earthquake really took down a lot of the Anchorage downtown area.
Well, Alaska certainly lives with a lot of seismic activity, as we say, a lot of earthquakes, and certainly our history includes in it the magnitude 9.2 earthquake in 1964, which is the second largest earthquake ever recorded on Earth. That kind of set the stage for modern Alaska in many ways. So while we are accustomed to earthquakes, it is not very common that they happen this close to heavy population.
And we're just getting word that, of course, the government, the White House has been fully briefed, and the governor of Alaska, Bill Walker, saying he's been in direct contact with the White House. Of course, there could be that additional funds are going to be needed from the Federal Emergency Management Association, FEMA, already dealing with a lot of relief efforts from hurricanes to the wildfires, but certainly the delegation of Alaska there in Washington will be talking to the White House for that kind of need. Remind me, Bill, I'm sorry, Mike, in terms of road damage, is that fairly easy to repair after an earthquake like this?
Road damage is certainly relatively common in significant earthquakes in this state. Of course, that means a lot of different things. Some torn up pavement is easy to fix, but there are also places where, for example, a landslide comes down across a road, or you have an elevated roadway that is in some way no longer structurally sound. These are certainly issues that can be far more complicated. There's a lot of different infrastructure that gets impacted in an earthquake like this.
And what about the power? We understand in some places the power is out?
Yeah, there have been widespread power outages over different areas of south central Alaska that has certainly compromised communication today. Many media outlets, for example, have not been able to do what they would normally do and whatnot. So it has slowed our ability to learn kind of comprehensively what has happened.
All right, Mike West, thank you so much for that report. We'll continue to be in touch with you as Fox News covers this story. Dan Springer, you're still with us, and we have about 2 minutes left before Shep Smith was going to take over. I was trying to get my speech coach there in Anchorage on the phone, but her battery is very low. They have no power in their house, but they are safe, which, of course, is the good news. In a minute and a half that we have left, tell us a little bit more about what we can expect in the coming hours, because as Rick Reichmuth reminded us, there is only about 6 hours of daylight at this time of the year in Alaska.
Well, it's interesting. Alaska's power grid is pretty deregulated. They've got multiple power companies serving those 280,000 people who live in Anchorage. And so we've got reports from those multiple power companies, and it seems like they've got about 60,000, by my count, about 60,000 people out. It could be a lot more than that, but they've got most of their customers who still have power. But they've got all hands on deck, obviously. They will have everybody in and then some coming to the area trying to restore power. That's the big issue right now. They do have multiple water main breaks, so that is an issue. You still have students who are sitting at the schools out in buses waiting to be picked up. Some of the students at an elementary school were taken to a local fire station. So parents are just scrambling to get their kids. You've got people assessing the damages at their house.
Indeed. All right. On the phone is Mike West. He's a state seismologist for Alaska and director of the Earthquake Center in Fairbanks. Tell us what you know, Mike.
Well, as I think your listeners know, we had a magnitude 7 earthquake about 2.5 hours ago here in Alaska that was very close to Anchorage. That's what makes this event notable. Large earthquakes are not uncommon in Alaska, but to be 5 miles away from downtown Anchorage is.
And what do you know then about the possible damage that Anchorage is looking at in terms of having to clean up? And how far outside of Anchorage? For example, we had the Sarah Palin tweet from Wasilla. We know that's just outside of Anchorage, but this damage could be quite widespread?
This earthquake was about 30 miles beneath the surface of the Earth, so it was actually felt over a pretty wide area, not just in Anchorage proper, but certainly Wasilla and throughout the surrounding towns there. It was felt very, very strongly, and damage is coming in from a number of different directions.
And tell me a little bit more about just the frequency of activity. And I'm just curious about how things have changed since 1964, when that last big earthquake really took down a lot of the Anchorage downtown area.
Well, Alaska certainly lives with a lot of seismic activity, as we say, a lot of earthquakes, and certainly our history includes in it the magnitude 9.2 earthquake in 1964, which is the second largest earthquake ever recorded on Earth. That kind of set the stage for modern Alaska in many ways. So while we are accustomed to earthquakes, it is not very common that they happen this close to heavy population.
And we're just getting word that, of course, the government, the White House has been fully briefed, and the governor of Alaska, Bill Walker, saying he's been in direct contact with the White House. Of course, there could be that additional funds are going to be needed from the Federal Emergency Management Association, FEMA, already dealing with a lot of relief efforts from hurricanes to the wildfires, but certainly the delegation of Alaska there in Washington will be talking to the White House for that kind of need. Remind me, Bill, I'm sorry, Mike, in terms of road damage, is that fairly easy to repair after an earthquake like this?
Road damage is certainly relatively common in significant earthquakes in this state. Of course, that means a lot of different things. Some torn up pavement is easy to fix, but there are also places where, for example, a landslide comes down across a road, or you have an elevated roadway that is in some way no longer structurally sound. These are certainly issues that can be far more complicated. There's a lot of different infrastructure that gets impacted in an earthquake like this.
And what about the power? We understand in some places the power is out?
Yeah, there have been widespread power outages over different areas of south central Alaska that has certainly compromised communication today. Many media outlets, for example, have not been able to do what they would normally do and whatnot. So it has slowed our ability to learn kind of comprehensively what has happened.
All right, Mike West, thank you so much for that report. We'll continue to be in touch with you as Fox News covers this story. Dan Springer, you're still with us, and we have about 2 minutes left before Shep Smith was going to take over. I was trying to get my speech coach there in Anchorage on the phone, but her battery is very low. They have no power in their house, but they are safe, which, of course, is the good news. In a minute and a half that we have left, tell us a little bit more about what we can expect in the coming hours, because as Rick Reichmuth reminded us, there is only about 6 hours of daylight at this time of the year in Alaska.
Well, it's interesting. Alaska's power grid is pretty deregulated. They've got multiple power companies serving those 280,000 people who live in Anchorage. And so we've got reports from those multiple power companies. And it seems like they've got about 60,000, by my count, about 60,000 people out. It could be a lot more than that. But they've got most of their customers who still have power. But they've got all hands on deck, obviously. They will have everybody in and then some coming to the area trying to restore power. That's the big issue right now. They do have multiple water main breaks, so that is an issue. You still have students who are sitting at the schools out in buses waiting to be picked up. Some of the students at an elementary school were taken to a local fire station, so parents are just scrambling to get their kids. You've got people assessing the damages at their